My wife accidentally sent a voice memo meant for her sister, and what I heard about me made me leave the next morning. So there I was, sprawled out in bed like a dead starfish, scrolling through my phone with one eye closed because let's be honest, I'm 32 and my eyes aren't what they used to be. The blue light was probably frying what little brain cells I had left after a 10-hour day at the office, but hey, that's the American dream, right? Work yourself into an early grave and pretend you're living your best life. The notification popped up at exactly 1:17 a.m. Lauren had sent me a voice memo, which wasn't exactly breaking news. My wife and her sister Naomi could probably set a world record for most voice messages exchanged between two human beings in a 24-hour period. I'm talking novel-length conversations about everything from their mom's latest dating disasters to whether oat milk is actually worth the extra $3 at Starbucks. Spoiler alert, it's not. I figured this was just another one of their epic sister sessions. Probably something about how their cousin Jessica's engagement photos looked like a Pinterest board threw up, or maybe Naomi's latest Hinge horror story. You know the drill. So I hit play without thinking twice about it. Already half smiling because Lauren's voice always made me feel like everything was right in the world. Boy, was I wrong about that. Ugh. Honestly, Naomi, sometimes I look at Marcus and I don't know. It's not what I pictured, you know. Wait, what? I blinked hard, suddenly very awake. Did she just say my name? In that tone? The kind of tone you use when you're talking about a restaurant that gave you food poisoning, not your husband of 2 years. He's sweet, solid, reliable. But he's just so plain. Safe. The words hit me like a freight train carrying a cargo of pure emotional destruction. Plain? Safe. I sat up so fast I probably gave myself whiplash, but I couldn't move to turn off the recording. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. Horrifying, but impossible to look away from. I missed the passion, the chase. With Damien, even the fights were exciting. And there it was. Damien. The ex-boyfriend who cheated on her with not one, not two, but 3 different women during their 2-year relationship. The same Damien who forgot to pay her back the $1,500 she lent him for his motorcycle. The Damien who once told her she was too clingy for wanting to spend time together more than twice a week. That Damien. She was missing that train wreck of a human being while lying next to me every night. Lauren's laugh came through the speaker next, light and casual, like she was discussing the weather instead of casually destroying her husband's entire sense of self-worth. It was the same laugh she used when she told funny stories at dinner parties, the one that made everyone lean in closer because they didn't want to miss the punchline. Turns out, I was the punchline. I mean, Marcus is great on paper, but sometimes I think I just got tired of waiting for something better. The phone slipped from my hand like it was made of hot coals, landing on the comforter with a soft thud that somehow sounded louder than a gunshot in the silence of our bedroom. My heart was doing this weird thing where it felt like it was trying to escape through my throat, beating so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. Great on paper. Tired of waiting for something better. Those words kept bouncing around in my skull like a pinball machine from hell. I was a consolation prize. A participation trophy. The human equivalent of settling for the store-brand cereal because the good stuff was too expensive. I looked over at Lauren, sleeping peacefully on her side, one hand tucked under her pillow, her breathing steady and calm. Her face looked so serene, so innocent in the dim light filtering through our bedroom curtains. This was the woman I'd spent 5 years falling deeper in love with. The woman who cried during dog food commercials and insisted on trying every new ice cream flavor at Baskin-Robbins. The woman who wore my old college sweatshirts and looked better in them than I ever did. The woman who apparently saw me as her safety net instead of her soulmate. I tried to process what I'd just heard, but my brain felt like it was running Windows 95 trying to load a 4K video. Everything was moving too slow and too fast at the same time. How long had she felt this way? Was this a recent revelation, or had she been faking it for months? Years? Every kiss goodnight, every I love you, exchanged over morning coffee, every time she'd grab my hand while we watched Netflix. Had it all been performed out of obligation? Was I just the safe choice she'd convinced herself to be happy with? Plain. The word kept echoing in my head like a broken record. I mean, I wasn't going to win any modeling contests, but I wasn't exactly Quasimodo either. I kept in decent shape, showered regularly, knew how to match my socks to my belt. I thought I was, reasonably attractive. Apparently, I thought wrong. And safe. God, that one stung worse than plain somehow. Safe implied boring. Predictable. The kind of guy who uses a coaster every single time and actually reads the terms and conditions before clicking agree. Which, okay, maybe I did both of those things. But since when was being reliable a character flaw? I sat there in the dark, staring at the ceiling like it might have answers written in invisible ink, trying to figure out how we'd gotten here. Had I become too comfortable? Too predictable? Was I guilty of letting our relationship slip into autopilot while she was craving turbulence? The worst part wasn't even what she'd said. It was how casually she'd said it. Like my feelings were just collateral damage in her late-night therapy session with her sister. Like I was some abstract concept instead of the guy who brought her soup when she was sick and remembered to record her favorite reality TV shows when she had to work late. I was Marcus, her husband, the guy who was supposed to be her person. Instead, I was apparently just the consolation prize she'd gotten tired of waiting to exchange for something shinier. You know that scene in horror movies where the idiot protagonist hears a weird noise in the basement and instead of getting the hell out of there, they grab a flashlight and go investigate? Yeah, well, apparently I'm that idiot, because instead of deleting that voice memo and pretending it never happened, I played the damn thing again. And again. And again. Each replay was like picking at a scab that hadn't even started healing yet. But I couldn't stop myself. It was like some twisted form of self-torture, the kind of psychological waterboarding that only comes from hearing your wife casually explain to her sister why you're basically the human equivalent of beige wall paint. Sometimes I look at Marcus and I don't know. It's not what I pictured, you know. The second time I heard it, I caught the little pause before she said my name. That tiny hesitation that suggested she was choosing her words carefully, which somehow made it worse. This wasn't some drunken rant or a moment of temporary insanity. She'd actually thought about this, considered her words, and still decided to verbally demolish me. He's sweet, solid, reliable, but he's just so plain. Safe. By the third replay, I was dissecting every syllable like I was preparing for a linguistics exam from hell. The way she said sweet sounded patronizing, like she was describing a golden retriever who'd learned to fetch her slippers. And reliable. Jesus Christ, she made it sound like a character flaw. Since when did being dependable become the relationship equivalent of missionary position? Boring but functional? I got up and started pacing around our bedroom like a caged animal at a really depressing zoo. The hardwood floors creaked under my feet, and I kept glancing at Lauren to make sure I wasn't waking her up. Because apparently, even in the middle of my emotional breakdown, I was still being considerate. Still being safe, reliable Marcus. I missed the passion, the chase. With Damien, even the fights were exciting. This was the part that really got to me. Damien, that walking red flag with commitment issues and a motorcycle he couldn't afford. The guy who treated Lauren like an optional side quest in the video game of his life. She missed fighting with that loser? She missed the drama, the uncertainty, the constant wondering if he'd show up when he said he would. What the hell was wrong with me that I thought treating my wife with respect and consistency was a good thing? Apparently, I should have been starting random arguments and disappearing for days at a time. Maybe I should have bought a leather jacket and started forgetting to call her back. Would that have made me more exciting? I sat down on the edge of the bed and put my head in my hands, trying to wrap my brain around this new reality. For 2 years of marriage and 3 years of dating before that, I thought we were happy. Like, genuinely happy. Not Instagram fake happy or keeping up appearances happy, but real, comfortable, this is my person happy. Turns out, I was the only one feeling that way. I mean, Marcus is great on paper, but sometimes I think I just got tired of waiting for something better. Great on paper. Like I was a job application she'd settled for because the position needed to be filled. Like I was the generic brand cereal she bought when Frosted Flakes was too expensive. Functional, adequate, but not what she really wanted. And tired of waiting for something better? How long had she been shopping around in her head? How many times had she looked at me across the dinner table and thought, well, this is my life now, I guess? I started thinking about all those little moments that I'd treasured, wondering if they meant something completely different to her. When she'd curl up next to me on the couch during our Sunday movie marathons, was she actually wishing she was somewhere else? When she'd laugh at my stupid jokes, was she just being polite? When she'd tell me she loved me, was there an invisible asterisk at the end that said, for now? until someone better comes along. The voice memo was only 47 seconds long. I checked. But those 47 seconds contained enough emotional shrapnel to last me several lifetimes. It was like she'd taken a grenade to our entire relationship, and I was just now realizing I'd been standing in the blast zone. I looked at my phone again, seeing her contact photo smiling back at me. It was from our honeymoon in Napa Valley, both of us grinning like idiots with wine-stained teeth, her hair messy from the convertible we'd rented. I remembered thinking in that moment that I was the luckiest guy alive, that somehow, this incredible woman had chosen me out of all the possibilities in the world. Except she hadn't really chosen me, had she? She'd just run out of patience waiting for her first choice to get his act together. I found myself scrolling through our text messages from earlier that week, looking for clues I might have missed. Tuesday. Can you pick up milk on your way home? Love you. Wednesday. Running late for dinner. Start without me. You're the best. Thursday. Can't wait to snuggle tonight. Had the worst day. All of it seemed genuine at the time. But now it felt like evidence of a performance I'd been too stupid to recognize. Was she really looking forward to snuggling? Or was she just going through the motions? Did she actually think I was the best? Or was she just grateful for the bare minimum? The worst part was that I couldn't even be mad at her for feeling this way. I mean, I was furious that she'd said it out loud to someone else instead of talking to me about it. But the feelings themselves? Maybe she couldn't help those. Maybe you can't force passion any more than you can force someone to like cilantro or understand why people watch golf on TV. But damn, it hurt knowing that while I'd been falling more in love with her every day, she'd been gradually settling for less than what she really wanted. It was like finding out your favorite song was actually just elevator music to everyone else. I glanced at the clock, 3:47 a.m. Lauren was still sleeping peacefully, completely unaware that her husband was having an existential crisis 6 feet away. Tomorrow, she'd wake up and kiss me goodbye like always, probably never realizing that she'd accidentally nuked our marriage with a misdirected voice memo. The irony wasn't lost on me that even now, in the middle of the worst night of my life, I was being quiet so I wouldn't disturb her sleep. Safe, reliable Marcus strikes again. Morning came whether I wanted it to or not, which is just typical of mornings. Really, they don't give a damn about your personal emotional disasters. The sun's going to rise, the birds are going to chirp, and life is going to keep trucking along like your entire world didn't just get nuked by a 47-second voice memo at 1:17 a.m. I'd managed maybe 20 minutes of sleep, and that was being generous. Most of the night had been spent alternating between staring at the ceiling like it owed me money and pacing around the house like a ghost who couldn't figure out how to move on to the afterlife. I'd made 3 cups of coffee that I didn't drink, started and abandoned 2 different Netflix shows, and somehow found myself reorganizing our junk drawer at 4 a.m. because apparently that's what rock bottom looks like for 32-year-old suburban husbands. When Lauren's alarm went off at 6:30, I was already sitting on the couch, still in yesterday's clothes, probably looking like I'd been hit by a truck driven by my own wife's brutal honesty. She shuffled into the kitchen wearing one of my old Northwestern t-shirts and those ridiculous fuzzy slippers that looked like angry pandas. The ones I'd bought her last Christmas because she said they were so ugly they're cute. And here's the kicker. She was humming. Actually humming some Taylor Swift song like she didn't have a care in the world. Like she hadn't just accidentally carpet-bombed her marriage 12 hours earlier. It was surreal, watching her go through her normal morning routine, turning on the coffee maker, checking her phone, doing that little stretch thing she always did where she'd reach her arms up toward the ceiling and make this tiny satisfied noise. "Morning, babe," she said, turning toward me with that sleepy smile I used to think was the most beautiful thing in the world. Now it just felt like looking at evidence of how completely clueless I'd been about my own life. "Want some coffee?" She walked over and kissed my cheek like she had every morning for the past 5 years. Same spot, same casual affection, same assumption that everything between us was exactly as it should be. Her lips felt different somehow, not physically, but like they belonged to a stranger who was really good at pretending to be my wife. I just stared at her. I mean, full-on stared like she was some kind of rare zoo animal I'd never seen before. Which, in a way, she was. This version of Lauren, the one who could casually tell her sister that her husband was a boring consolation prize, and then wake up acting like newlyweds, was completely foreign to me. "Marcus? You okay?" She tilted her head, and I caught a flicker of something in her expression. Concern, maybe, or confusion about why I was giving her the 1,000-yard stare instead of my usual groggy grunt of acknowledgement. I wanted to say something. Anything. Maybe ask her how she slept, or if she had any interesting dreams, or hey, by the way, did you happen to accidentally destroy our entire marriage last night, and then completely forget about it? But the words just weren't there. It was like my brain had blue-screened and was stuck on that spinning wheel of death. She moved around the kitchen with this easy confidence, like she owned the space. Which she did, obviously. It was her house too. But watching her now felt like watching someone perform a play I didn't know I was part of. Every movement seemed calculated, every gesture a little too perfect, like she was acting out the role of loving wife, instead of actually being one. The weatherman said it might rain later, she said, pulling 2 mugs from the cabinet. One had a picture of our cat, Mr. Whiskers, on it, a Christmas gift from her mom that we both pretended to like. The other was my old college mug that had seen better decades. You might want to grab an umbrella. An umbrella. She was talking about the weather and umbrellas while I sat there feeling like someone had reached into my chest and rearranged all my organs. It was such a perfectly normal, married couple thing to say that it almost made me laugh. Almost. That's when I noticed her phone sitting on the counter next to the coffee maker, screen down, like it was just another innocent kitchen appliance instead of the weapon of mass destruction that had blown up my life. She followed my gaze and froze. Actually, physically froze, like someone had hit her personal pause button. I watched the exact moment reality came crashing back into her face. Her eyes went wide, her hand flew to her mouth, and all the color drained from her cheeks like someone had pulled a plug. It was like watching someone remember they'd left their car running in the garage with the door closed. Did you, She cleared her throat, but her voice still came out like she'd been gargling gravel. Did you listen to the message I sent last night? The question hung in the air between us like smoke from a house fire. She knew. Of course she knew. The guilty look on her face was so obvious it might as well have been tattooed on her forehead. She was probably hoping I'd been too tired to check my phone, or maybe that I'd listened to it, and somehow missed the part where she basically called me human ambient. I could have lied. Could have shaken my head and pretended I had no idea what she was talking about. Could have given us both an out, a chance to pretend that everything was still fine, and we were still the happy couple who argued about whose turn it was to take out the trash, and whether Die Hard was a Christmas movie. But I didn't say anything. I just sat there looking at her like she was a puzzle I couldn't solve, watching her face cycle through about 15 different emotions in the span of 3 seconds. Panic, guilt, fear, regret. It was like watching someone's inner monologue play out in real time. Marcus, I didn't mean it like that, she said, the words tumbling out so fast they practically ran into each other. It was just late. I was venting. Naomi asked me if I ever wonder about stuff. Stuff. She was calling our entire marriage stuff now. That was helpful. Her explanation sounded exactly like what it was. Damage control from someone who'd been caught red-handed. The kind of backpedaling you do when you realize your private thoughts weren't as private as you thought they were. But the thing about accidentally telling the truth is that you can't untell it. The words were already out there, floating around in the universe like toxic waste. I stood up, grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair, and headed for the door. I could feel her watching me, could practically hear the gears turning in her head as she tried to figure out how to fix what couldn't be unfixed. I need air, I said, which was probably the understatement of the century. What I really needed was to figure out. So there I was at noon, standing on Zane's front porch like some kind of emotional refugee with a hastily packed duffel bag that looked like it had been assembled by someone having a nervous breakdown. Which, let's be honest, it had been. I'd thrown random stuff into that bag with all the strategic planning of a drunk person trying to pack for a weekend trip. 3 pairs of underwear, 1 sock, 2 different shoes that didn't match, and for some reason, my college copy of The Great Gatsby. Because apparently my subconscious thought a little literary tragedy would really complete the whole pathetic picture. I stood there for a solid 2 minutes before ringing the doorbell, trying to figure out what the hell I was going to say. Hey man, my wife thinks I'm about as exciting as watching paint dry. Can I crash on your couch? Or maybe, surprise, turns out my marriage was a lie. Got any beer? Neither option seemed particularly appealing. Zane opened the door wearing a Chicago Bears jersey that had seen better decades and holding a gaming controller like I'd interrupted him in the middle of saving the world from digital zombies. We'd been best friends since freshman year of college, which meant he'd seen me through my awkward phase, the whole 4 years, my dating disasters, numerous and legendary, and that unfortunate semester when I thought I could pull off a goatee. I could not. He took one look at my face, then at the duffel bag, then back at my face, and his expression shifted from confused to concerned in about half a second. That's the thing about having a best friend for over a decade. They can read your emotional state like it's printed on your forehead in neon letters. Dude, he said, stepping aside to let me in. You look like hell warmed over and then left out in the rain. Thanks. That's exactly what every man wants to hear when his life falls apart, I said, dropping my bag on his hardwood floor with a thud that seemed way too loud for such a small amount of stuff, really boosting my confidence here. Zane's apartment was exactly what you'd expect from a 32-year-old software engineer who'd never gotten married. Minimalist furniture that looked like it came from IKEA's I don't know how to be an adult collection, a massive TV that probably cost more than my car, and a kitchen that clearly existed only to store takeout containers and beer. It was the kind of place that screamed eternal bachelor, but in a weirdly comforting way. Want to talk about it? He asked, closing the door behind me. Not yet, I said, which was code for, I'm about 30 seconds away from either crying or punching something, and I'd prefer to do neither in your living room. Cool, Zane said, because that's the beautiful thing about male friendship. Sometimes the best thing you can offer someone is the complete absence of forced conversation and emotional processing. Beer. He disappeared into the kitchen and came back with 2 cold ones, handing me a Stella Artois like it was a prescription for existential crisis. We sat down on his couch, a massive leather thing that probably violated several city ordinances regarding furniture size, and stared at his TV screen, which was paused on some first-person shooter game where he'd apparently been in the middle of eliminating bad guys with extreme prejudice. You can stay as long as you need, he said after we'd both taken a few sips. Guest room's yours. Fair warning though, the air mattress has a slow leak, so you'll probably wake up on the floor every morning. But hey, at least you'll wake up. That was Zane for you. Practical to the point of being almost philosophical. He didn't ask what happened, didn't demand explanations, didn't try to fix everything with unsolicited advice. He just offered space and beer and the promise that I wouldn't have to sleep on the streets like some kind of suburban vagrant. We spent the afternoon not talking about my marriage, which was exactly what I needed. Instead, we ordered pizza that was probably terrible for us and definitely delicious, played video games where we could shoot digital enemies instead of dealing with real-life emotional problems, and caught up on all the random stuff that falls through the cracks when you're busy being married to someone who apparently thinks you're human ambient. By the time evening rolled around, I felt almost human again. Not good, exactly, but like maybe I wouldn't spontaneously combust from emotional overload. That's when I made the mistake of checking my phone and seeing 17 missed calls from Lauren, 12 text messages that started apologetic and gradually escalated to desperate, and 1 voicemail that I absolutely was not ready to listen to. She's been trying to reach you, Zane observed, glancing at my phone screen. That's a lot of notifications for someone who's not in trouble. Yeah, well, turns out accidentally telling your sister that your husband is a boring safety net tends to generate a lot of follow-up communication, I said, taking another swig of beer. Who knew? That's when I did something I probably should have done 6 hours earlier. I played the voice memo for Zane. Watching his face while he listened was like watching someone witness a car accident in slow motion. His expression went from curious to confused to genuinely pissed off, and by the time Lauren's voice got to the part about missing Damien, Zane was staring at my phone like it had personally insulted his mother. Damn, man, he said when it finished playing. That's cold, right? I said, feeling oddly vindicated that someone else thought this was as screwed up as I did. I mean, I knew I wasn't exactly Ryan Reynolds or whatever, but I didn't think I was putting her to sleep every night. Zane shook his head, still looking stunned. It's not about being exciting or boring, dude. It's about respect. You don't say that stuff about someone you love, even if you're thinking it. Especially not to someone else. And that was the thing that had been eating at me all day, the part that hurt worse than being called plain or safe. It wasn't just that she felt that way. Feelings are complicated, and maybe you can't help what you feel. It was that she'd felt comfortable enough to voice those thoughts to someone else, to turn our marriage into casual conversation material for her late-night sister therapy sessions. I was her husband, but apparently I wasn't worth the courtesy of keeping her disappointments private. You want my honest opinion? Zane asked, setting down his beer and turning to face me directly. Do I have a choice? She fucked up, he said simply. Big time. And now she gets to live with the consequences of saying the quiet part out loud. It was more than cold, like he'd said. It was cruel honesty disguised as a private confession, and I was the collateral damage in her moment of brutal transparency. The texts started coming in like digital artillery fire around 7 p.m. And let me tell you, Lauren had apparently decided that if persistence was a superpower, she was going to be the fucking Captain America of desperate wives trying to undo catastrophic voice memo incidents. My phone kept lighting up like a Christmas tree having a seizure, each notification sound making me want to chuck the whole device in a Lake Michigan and take up life as a hermit who communicates exclusively through smoke signals. But I couldn't stop myself from reading them, because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment with the self-preservation instincts of a lemming. Please come home. That was the first one, simple and direct. Almost reasonable, if you ignored the fact that home now felt like a crime scene where my self-esteem had been brutally murdered. We need to talk. Text number 2, which was rich coming from someone who'd apparently been having plenty of talks about our marriage, just not with me. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife and serve it at a dinner party for people who enjoy the taste of bitter disappointment. You're overreacting. I didn't mean it. And there it was, text number 3, featuring the classic greatest hits of people who get caught saying exactly what they mean. The old, I didn't mean it defense, which is basically the relationship equivalent of, it was just a prank, bro, except less funny and more soul-crushing. I love you. Text number 4 made me actually laugh out loud, which startled Zane so much he nearly dropped his controller and accidentally got his digital character murdered by a zombie. Love. She loved me. The same way people love their reliable Honda Civic, grateful for the dependability, but not exactly getting their heart racing when they see it in the driveway. By the time text number 12 rolled around, Lauren had apparently progressed through all 5 stages of grief and landed somewhere in the desperate bargaining phase. Marcus, please answer me. I know you're reading these. I can see the read receipts. Which was fair, because I was reading them, like some kind of masochistic literary critic reviewing the worst poetry ever written about my own life. But here's the thing about read receipts. They're like emotional surveillance. Just because I was reading her texts didn't mean I was ready to respond to them. I wasn't ready to pretend that everything was fine, that we could just go back to our regularly scheduled programming of married life like nothing had happened. Because something had happened. Something big and ugly and impossible to unsee. I started doing this thing where I'd analyze every interaction we'd ever had, like I was some kind of forensic relationship investigator trying to solve the cold case of my own marriage. Every birthday card she'd ever given me, every anniversary dinner, every lazy Sunday morning when we'd stayed in bed reading the news on our phones. Had it all been performance art? Had she been mentally comparing me to other guys the whole time, keeping a running tally of all the ways I didn't measure up? Take our second anniversary dinner, for example. We'd gone to this Italian place downtown that had been booked solid for 2 months, and I'd felt so proud that I'd managed to snag us a reservation. Lauren had worn this blue dress that made her eyes look incredible, and when she'd smiled at me across the table, I'd thought, this is it. This is what happiness looks like. But now I was wondering, had she been sitting there wishing she was somewhere else? Had she been thinking about Damien and his stupid motorcycle and the exciting fights they used to have? When she told me the risotto was perfect, had she actually been thinking that everything about the evening was just adequate? Or what about our wedding day? Jesus Christ, our wedding day. I'd spent months planning little surprises for her, hiring her favorite band to play during the reception, arranging for her college roommate to fly in from Seattle, even learning to dance properly because I knew how much it meant to her. I'd felt like the luckiest guy alive when she'd walked down that aisle, like I'd somehow won the cosmic lottery. Had she been settling even then? Had she been looking out at all those faces and thinking, well, this is my life now, I guess. The worst part was that I couldn't even be properly angry at her for feeling this way. I mean, I was furious that she'd said it out loud to someone else instead of talking to me about it. But the feelings themselves? You can't really help what you feel. You can't force yourself to be passionate about someone any more than you can force yourself to like Brussels sprouts or enjoy death metal. But damn, it hurt knowing that while I'd been falling more in love with her every day, she'd been gradually resigning herself to a life of comfortable disappointment. It was like finding out your favorite song was just background noise to everyone else, or discovering that what you thought was a love story was actually just a really long episode of settling for less. I kept thinking about all those romantic comedies where the woman realizes she's been with the wrong guy all along and runs off with someone more exciting. Except usually, the boring guy she leaves behind is portrayed as some kind of uptight villain who doesn't deserve love anyway. Turns out, sometimes the boring guy is just a regular person who thought he was enough for someone he loved. Zane walked into the living room around 9 p.m., carrying 2 fresh beers, and took one look at my face. "You're doing that thing again," he said. "What thing?" "That thing where you overthink everything until your brain turns into soup. I can literally see the gears grinding from here." He was right, of course. I'd been sitting there for 2 hours picking apart my entire relationship like I was conducting an autopsy on my own happiness. But I couldn't stop myself. Every memory felt contaminated now, every moment of joy tainted by the possibility that it had been one-sided. "She was looking for excitement," I said, accepting the beer and taking a long sip. "And I was looking for a teammate." "Yeah," Zane said, settling onto the couch next to me. "And there's nothing wrong with either of those things. You just wanted different things." But that was the problem, wasn't it? I hadn't known we wanted different things. I'd thought we were on the same page, building the same life, working toward the same goals. Turns out, I'd been playing checkers while she was playing chess, and I'd never even realized we were playing different games. 2 days into my stay at Hotel Zane, which featured a deflating air mattress, instant ramen cuisine, and the dulcet sounds of his upstairs neighbor practicing what I can only assume was interpretive dance at 3 a.m. My phone rang with a number I recognized, but definitely wasn't expecting to see. Naomi, Lauren's sister, the unwitting recipient of the voice memo that had nuked my marriage from orbit. The same Naomi who probably knew more about my relationship problems than I did, which was saying something since I was currently living through them in real time. I stared at her contact photo for a solid 10 seconds, debating whether to answer or let it go to voicemail and deal with whatever emotional hand grenade she was about to lob at me later. Naomi wasn't exactly known for her subtle approach to family drama. This was a woman who once told their cousin Jessica that her boyfriend looked like a discount Ryan Gosling who shopped exclusively at gas stations, right to his face at Christmas dinner. "You going to answer that? Or just have a staring contest with your phone?" Zane called from the kitchen, where he was performing some kind of culinary magic that involved microwaving leftover Chinese food and calling it dinner. "It's Naomi," I said, like that explained everything. Which, in Zane's mind, it probably did. He'd met her at our wedding and had later described the experience as like being interviewed by a very pretty FBI agent who definitely knows all your secrets. "Yikes," he said. "Answer it. Might as well get this over with." So I did, bracing myself for whatever fresh hell was about to unfold through my phone speaker. "Marcus." Her voice hit me immediately, and I could tell she'd been crying. Not the pretty, single tear rolling down the cheek kind of crying you see in movies, but the real deal, the puffy, red-eyed, tissues everywhere kind that happens when your world gets rearranged by forces beyond your control. "I'm so sorry." And just like that, my anger deflated like Zane's air mattress. Because here's the thing about Naomi. For all her bluntness and tendency to treat family gatherings like episodes of a reality show, she was genuinely good people. She hadn't asked to be dragged into this mess. She was just the unlucky recipient of her sister's late-night emotional breakdown. "It's not your fault," I said, which was true. Naomi hadn't forced Lauren to send that voice memo. She hadn't made Lauren choose those particular words, or encouraged her to casually destroy her husband's sense of self-worth in under 50 seconds. She was just collateral damage in the explosion. "Lauren's been crying for days," Naomi continued, her voice cracking like ice on a warm day. "She says she didn't mean it, that she was just spiraling." Spiraling. That was an interesting word choice. Like Lauren had been caught in some kind of emotional tornado that had randomly picked up her true feelings and flung them at her sister's phone. Very convenient. This spiraling business really took the personal responsibility right out of the equation. Spiraling into what? I asked, settling back into Zane's couch and preparing myself for whatever creative explanation was about to come my way. Regret for marrying me? The silence on the other end of the line stretched out like a bad joke that no one wanted to finish. I could practically hear Naomi's brain working, trying to figure out how to navigate this conversational minefield without accidentally stepping on an emotional landmine. She's scared, Naomi finally said, which wasn't really an answer to my question, but was probably the most honest thing anyone had said to me in days. She says you've always been the best thing that ever happened to her. I actually laughed at that one. Not a happy laugh, but the kind of bitter, ironic chuckle you make when someone tries to convince you that black is white and up is down. Then why did she call me plain? Safe. Like I was her emergency contact instead of her husband. Because she's an idiot, Naomi said without hesitation, which was refreshingly direct. And because sometimes people say stupid things when they're confused about their own feelings. Confused, I repeated, tasting the word like it was something unpleasant I'd found in my food. That's what we're calling it now? Confusion? Marcus, I know how this sounds, Naomi said, and I could hear her moving around, probably pacing the way Lauren did when she was stressed. They had more in common than either of them liked to admit. But I've watched you two together for 5 years. I've seen how she looks at you when you're not paying attention. I've heard her brag about you to strangers at parties. She loves you. But she's not in love with me, I said, because there was a difference and we all knew it. Love was comfortable, practical, the kind of thing you felt for family members and really good friends. Being in love was different. It was messy and irrational and made you do stupid things like learn how to salsa dance or drive 6 hours just to surprise someone with their favorite donuts. Naomi didn't argue with that, which told me everything I needed to know. She made a mistake, she said instead. A huge, terrible mistake. But don't you think your marriage is worth fighting for? And there it was. The question I'd been avoiding for 2 days. Was our marriage worth fighting for? Was love without passion enough? Could I spend the rest of my life with someone who saw me as the safe choice, the reliable option, the human equivalent of a Toyota Camry? I don't know, I said honestly. I really don't know. She wants to talk to you, Naomi said. Will you at least consider it? I looked around Zane's apartment, at the empty pizza boxes stacked on the coffee table, at the gaming controllers scattered across the floor, at the life of a 32-year-old bachelor who'd never had to deal with accidentally discovering that his spouse thought he was about as exciting as watching grass grow. Maybe, I said, but not yet. How long do you need? I don't know that either. Naomi sighed, the kind of deep E. I'll never defend what she said, she told me. You didn't deserve that. I'll never defend it. And I told her as much. Thanks, I said, and I meant it. Because somebody needed to be on my side in this mess, even if it was just my sister-in-law who'd gotten dragged into it against her will. But Marcus, she said just before I was about to hang up. Yeah, don't give up on her yet. People say things they don't mean when they're scared. The problem was, I was pretty sure Lauren had meant every word. 5 days of living like a refugee in Zane's bachelor paradise, which included learning that my best friend apparently survived entirely on energy drinks and whatever food could be delivered to his door, and I finally agreed to meet Lauren. Not because I was ready, exactly, but because avoiding her forever seemed like the kind of thing that only worked in movies where the protagonist could just move to a different state and start over as a mysterious stranger with a tragic past. We met at Murphy's Diner, this little place 3 blocks from my office that served coffee strong enough to wake the dead and pie that could probably cure minor forms of depression. It was neutral territory, the kind of public space where people couldn't have complete emotional breakdowns without causing a scene. At least, that was the theory. I got there first, partly because I'm chronically early to everything and partly because I needed those 10 minutes to sit there and prepare myself for whatever fresh hell was about to unfold. I ordered black coffee and sat in a booth near the window, watching normal people live their normal lives on the sidewalk outside, and wondering if any of them had ever discovered that their marriage was basically a long-term participation trophy. When Lauren walked in, I barely recognized her. And I don't mean that in some romantic, metaphorical way. I mean she literally looked like she'd been hit by a truck carrying a load of emotional devastation. Her eyes were puffy and red, like she'd been crying for days straight, which she probably had. Her makeup was half worn off, applied and reapplied so many times it looked like abstract art. Her hands were shaking as she slid into the booth across from me, and not from the cold. This was not the composed, put-together woman who'd hummed Taylor Swift songs while casually destroying my self-esteem. This was someone who'd been living in her own personal hell for the better part of a week, and honestly, I wasn't sure how to feel about that. "Marcus," she said, and even her voice sounded different. Smaller, like someone had turned down her volume dial and forgotten to turn it back up. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, but didn't say anything, because what was I supposed to say? "You're welcome for agreeing to meet with my wife, who thinks I'm human ambient. Thanks for looking like you haven't slept since you accidentally nuked our marriage." There really wasn't a greeting card for this particular situation. She ordered tea, chamomile, which she only drank when she was stressed or sick, and we sat there for a moment in the kind of uncomfortable silence that makes you hyper-aware of every sound in the room. The coffee machine hissing, some guy at the counter arguing about his order, the couple in the next booth discussing whether their kid needed braces. Normal life continuing around us while we sat in the wreckage of ours. "Marcus, I was stupid," she finally said, jumping straight into the deep end without testing the water first. It was 1 a.m. I'd had wine. I was overthinking everything. Wine, of course. The classic excuse for accidentally telling the truth. As if alcohol was some kind of magical honesty serum that forced people to say things they didn't really mean. Except that's not how alcohol works. It just removes the filter that usually keeps you from saying the things you're actually thinking. "Wine doesn't make you lie, Lauren," I said quietly. "It makes you honest." She flinched like I'd slapped her, which wasn't my intention, but wasn't exactly unwelcome either. Because someone needed to call bullshit on this whole, I didn't mean it, narrative she was trying to sell. "It's not that I don't love you," she continued, her voice getting smaller and more desperate with each word. "It's just, sometimes I wonder if this is it. Forever. I don't know who I am anymore." And there it was. The real issue, dressed up in therapy speak and delivered with the kind of trembling sincerity that made you want to either hug someone or shake them until their teeth rattled. She didn't know who she was anymore. Which was interesting, because I'd thought she was my wife. Apparently, I'd been wrong about that too. "Then why marry me?" I asked, keeping my voice level, even though I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff made of broken glass. "If you weren't sure, if you were still figuring yourself out, why did you walk down that aisle and promise to love me for the rest of your life?" The question hung between us like smoke from a fire we couldn't put out. I watched her face cycle through emotions. Guilt. Fear. Something that might have been regret, but could just as easily have been panic at being called out. "Because you were the first person who ever made me feel safe," she whispered, and I could see tears starting to gather in her eyes like storm clouds on the horizon. And I thought that would be enough. Safe. There was that word again, the one that had been haunting me for 5 days straight. Not loved, not cherished, not desired, safe. Like I was a security blanket she'd outgrown, but wasn't quite ready to give up. "But it's not," I said, and it wasn't really a question because we both knew the answer. She didn't respond, which was an answer all by itself. She just sat there staring into her tea like it might contain the solutions to all her existential problems, her shoulders shaking with the effort of not completely falling apart in public. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said finally. "I never wanted any of this to happen. But you did want something else," I said. "Someone else. Something more exciting than what we have." She looked up at me then, and I saw something in her eyes that I'd never seen before, fear. Not fear of losing me, but fear of admitting that everything I was saying was true. Fear of owning up to the fact that she'd been going through the motions of our marriage while secretly hoping for something better to come along. "I don't know what I want," she said, which was probably the most honest thing she'd said to me in months. "I'm so confused about everything." "Well," I said, standing up and dropping a $10 bill on the table to cover my coffee. "At least now we're both confused." I walked out of that diner not because I hated her, though part of me definitely did, but because I couldn't spend another minute watching her try to convince both of us that this was all just a big misunderstanding that could be fixed with enough apologies and explanations. Some things, once broken, don't go back together the same way. And some truths, once spoken, can't be unspoken. We ended up talking for 3 more hours after I dramatically stormed out of Murphy's Diner like I was auditioning for a daytime soap opera. Because apparently, even when your marriage is circling the drain faster than a goldfish funeral, you still can't resist the urge to keep picking at the wound until it bleeds all over everything. Lauren followed me outside, of course, because that's what people do when they're desperate to fix something that might be fundamentally unfixable. She caught up with me in the parking lot, her heels clicking against the asphalt like a countdown timer to our relationship's expiration date. "Marcus, please," she said, grabbing my arm with the kind of grip usually reserved for people trying not to fall off cliffs. "We can't just leave it like this." And she was right. Damn her. We couldn't. Because despite everything, despite the voice memo and the casual character assassination and the whole "you're my safety net" revelation, this was still my wife. The woman I'd promised to love through sickness and health, for better or worse, till death do us part. Apparently, nobody had mentioned anything about surviving accidental honesty in those vows. So we went back inside and ordered more coffee neither of us wanted, and proceeded to have the kind of conversation that should probably come with a warning label. Caution. Contents may explode your entire understanding of your own life. She kept insisting it was just a moment of weakness, like she'd temporarily lost her mind and accidentally voiced thoughts that weren't really hers. As if her subconscious had been hijacked by some malicious entity that specialized in destroying marriages through poorly timed voice memos. But the more she talked, the more I realized she was trying to convince herself as much as me. "I was having a bad week," she explained, wrapping her hands around her mug like it was a life preserver. "Work was stressful. My mom had been calling constantly about Dad's retirement party, and Naomi was going through her whole thing with Derek. Ah yes, the classic, everything else was wrong so I accidentally told the truth about my marriage defense. Because obviously, external stress forces people to reveal their deepest, most honest feelings about their spouses. It's basically a law of physics at this point. So when you're stressed, you default to thinking I'm boring?" I asked, which probably wasn't the most productive question but seemed relevant to the discussion. "That's your go-to coping mechanism? Mentally cataloging all the ways your husband disappoints you?" She winced like I'd physically hit her, which wasn't my intention but also wasn't entirely unwelcome. Because somebody needed to acknowledge that this wasn't just about one stupid voice memo. This was about a fundamental disconnect between what we thought our marriage was and what it actually had been. "It's not that simple," she said, which is what people always say when they're trying to make something that is actually pretty simple sound incredibly complicated. "I love you. I do. It's just that you wish I was someone else." I finished for her, because somebody needed to say the quiet part out loud. Someone more exciting. Someone who makes your heart race instead of making you feel safe. The way she looked at me then, like I'd just solved a puzzle she'd been working on for years, told me everything I needed to know. She hadn't realized that's what she'd been feeling until I said it out loud, which was almost worse than if she'd been consciously thinking it all along. "I never said I wished you were someone else," she protested, but her voice lacked conviction. It was the kind of half-hearted denial you make when you're caught in a truth you're not ready to admit. "You didn't have to," I said. "You told your sister you missed the passion you had with your ex. You said I was the safe choice. You literally said you got tired of waiting for something better. What exactly am I supposed to take from that?" We went in circles for what felt like hours. Round and round, like we were stuck in some kind of emotional washing machine set to the destroy everything cycle. She'd claim it was a moment of weakness. I'd point out that moments of weakness usually reveal what people really think, and then we'd start the whole dance over again. She kept trying to reframe it, to make it sound like this was all about her own insecurities and confusion rather than about me being fundamentally inadequate as a husband. But I couldn't unhear what I'd heard. I couldn't unknow what I now knew about how she really saw our relationship. "You were the safe choice. I missed the passion I had with someone else. Maybe I got tired of waiting for something better." Those weren't words you could take back with enough apologies and explanations. They weren't mistakes or misunderstandings. They were truths that had been sitting in her heart like unexploded bombs, waiting for the right moment to detonate. The worst part was watching her realize, in real time, that everything I was saying was accurate. I could see it in her face, the gradual recognition that she had been settling, that she had been going through the motions of loving me while secretly hoping for something more. It was like watching someone discover they'd been sleepwalking through their own life. "I don't know how to fix this," she said finally, and that might have been the most honest thing she'd said all day. "I don't know how to make you believe that I really do love you." "The problem isn't whether you love me," I said, stirring sugar into coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. "The problem is that loving me isn't enough for you. And I can't spend the rest of my life wondering if I'm just a placeholder until something better comes along." She started crying then. Not the pretty, single-tear kind of crying, but the ugly, soul-deep sobbing that happens when you realize you've broken something that can't be fixed. And watching her cry should have made me want to comfort her, should have triggered all those protective instincts that come with loving someone. Instead, I just felt tired, bone-deep, existentially exhausted in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. Because at the end of the day, it didn't matter how much she loved me if she didn't actually want to be with me. It didn't matter how sorry she was if she couldn't change how she felt. And it definitely didn't matter how much we both wanted to fix this if the fundamental problem was that we wanted different things from our marriage. I walked out of that cafe not because I stopped loving her, but because I finally understood that love without genuine desire is just really expensive friendship with joint tax returns. 2 weeks after the great diner conversation of doom, I found myself standing in the middle of what would charitably be called an apartment and more accurately be described as a slightly oversized closet with delusions of grandeur. The place was small enough that I could touch both walls of the living room if I stretched my arms out, but it was mine. All mine. No shared anything. No compromises on furniture placement. No having to pretend that throw pillows served any purpose beyond making couches look more inviting. The apartment hunting process had been a special kind of hell that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Turns out, when you're 32 and suddenly single after thinking you'd figured out your whole life trajectory, the rental market treats you like a confused teenager who doesn't understand how adulting works. Every landlord I met seemed personally offended that I was looking for a one-bedroom instead of a family-sized place, like I'd somehow failed at the basic human task of accumulating the appropriate amount of people and stuff. "Just you?" they'd ask, looking at me like I was some kind of suspicious character who probably had bodies buried in my backyard. "Just me," I'd confirm, which apparently made me either tragically lonely or potentially dangerous. There was no middle ground in the rental world for guys who'd recently discovered their marriages were elaborate participation trophies. But I finally found this place, a converted studio in a building that had seen better decades, but still had character. Assuming character meant slightly crooked floors and a bathroom the size of a phone booth. It was perfect in its imperfection, the kind of space that said, "Welcome to your new life. Hope you don't mind that the kitchen is technically part of the living room." Zane helped me move, which mostly involved him carrying my pathetically small collection of belongings while making increasingly creative jokes about my minimalist lifestyle. Apparently, when you've been married for 2 years, you don't actually own that much stuff. Most of our furniture, our dishes, our random decorative objects. They all belonged to us, and I wasn't about to fight over who got custody of the throw pillows Lauren had insisted we needed. "Dude, this is it?" Zane asked, looking at my 2 boxes of personal items like they were evidence of some tragic backstory. "This is your entire life." "Turns out I'm not much of a collector," I said, which was true. Most of my important stuff, clothes, books, my laptop, that ugly mug my dad had given me for graduation, fit into a duffel bag and a couple of cardboard boxes. Everything else had been part of the shared mythology of Marcus and Lauren, and I wasn't interested in taking home artifacts from a relationship that had apparently been one-sided the whole time. "What about the couch?" he asked, referring to the massive sectional we'd bought together last year after spending 3 weekends touring furniture stores like we were conducting some kind of scientific research project. "She can keep it," I said. "I'm pretty sure she picked it out anyway." Which was true. Most of our shared possessions had been Lauren's choices that I'd agreed to because that's what you do when you're in love. You compromise, you defer to your partner's preferences, you convince yourself that throw pillows really do make a difference. Looking back, I couldn't think of a single major decision about our home that had been primarily mine. I'd been a supporting actor in my own living space. We didn't talk about Lauren much while we moved my stuff in, which was exactly what I needed. Zane had this amazing ability to be present without being intrusive, to help without asking uncomfortable questions, to just exist in the same space without feeling like he needed to fix everything. It was the kind of friendship that reminded you why male bonding evolved around shared activities instead of deep emotional processing. Beer? He asked after we'd finished arranging my belongings in ways that made the apartment look slightly less like a crime scene. God, yes, I said, because if there was ever a time for day drinking, it was probably while contemplating the ruins of your adult life in a studio apartment that smelled faintly of the previous tenants' cooking experiments. We sat on my new couch, a secondhand leather thing I'd found on Craigslist that looked like it had survived several previous relationships, and cracked open cold ones while surveying my new kingdom. It wasn't much, but it was honest. No pretense, no performance, no trying to be something I wasn't for someone who'd never really wanted me to begin with. That's when my phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. The first one since our marathon conversation at Murphy's Diner, and I'd kind of been hoping she'd taken the hint and moved on to the acceptance stage of whatever grief process she was working through. I won't bother you again, the message read. I'll always regret what I said. I stared at the screen for a long moment, trying to figure out how to feel about that. Part of me wanted to respond, to say something gracious or forgiving, or at least acknowledge that she'd reached out. But another part of me, the part that had been listening to that voice memo on repeat for 2 weeks, just felt tired. She texted, I told Zane, showing him the message. He read it and shook his head. Too little, too late. Too honest, too late, I said, which felt more accurate. The problem wasn't that she'd been cruel or deliberately hurtful. The problem was that she'd been truthful about things she should have either worked through privately or discussed with me directly. You can't unsay the truth, and you can't unknow what you know about how someone really sees you. I didn't reply. Some words are better left hanging in the digital void, unanswered and unacknowledged. Instead, I deleted the message and turned off my phone. So what now? Zane asked, settling back into the couch like he was prepared to help me figure out the rest of my life over beer and whatever takeout we could get delivered to my new place. Now I learn how to be single again, I said. How to make decisions without consulting anyone. How to eat dinner without making conversation. How to watch TV without negotiating over the remote. Sounds lonely, Zane said, but not in a judgmental way. More like he was just stating a fact. Yeah, I agreed. But it's honest lonely, not pretend happy lonely. And that, I was learning, made all the difference in the world. 3 months later, and I was discovering that life after emotional nuclear warfare had a weird way of reorganizing itself into something that almost resembled normal. Not the same normal as before. That version of normal had died a brutal death at 1:17 a.m. via voice memo, but a new kind of normal that belonged entirely to me. I'd started hiking again, which sounds like one of those cliché finding myself in nature stories that divorced guys tell at bars to explain why they suddenly own expensive outdoor gear. But the truth was simpler and less profound. I'd always loved hiking, and somewhere in the comfortable routine of marriage, I'd just stopped. Too many weekends spent doing couple things, too many Saturday mornings sacrificed to errands and social obligations, and Lauren's extensive list of home improvement projects that somehow always required my participation. Now my Saturdays belonged to me again. I'd wake up early, grab my old hiking boots from the closet, the ones Lauren had always complained made me look like a dad trying to relive his youth, and drive out to whatever trail looked interesting on the hiking app I downloaded. No negotiating, no compromising, no having to explain why I wanted to spend 4 hours walking up a mountain just to walk back down. The first time I'd gone out alone, I'd felt guilty about it, like I was somehow betraying the memory of our relationship by enjoying something without her. But by the third or fourth hike, the guilt had faded into something that felt suspiciously like relief. It turns out, when you don't have to worry about whether your hiking partner is having a good time, you can actually focus on having a good time yourself. Reading had made a comeback too. I'd always been a book guy, the kind of person who carried paperbacks in his back pocket and read during lunch breaks. But marriage had somehow turned my reading time into our Netflix time. Don't get me wrong, I'd enjoyed our lazy evenings binge-watching whatever show Lauren was currently obsessed with, but there's something to be said for getting lost in a good book without someone periodically asking what's happening or whether you think the main character is making smart choices. I'd started laughing again, which sounds dramatic but was actually the thing that surprised me most. Real laughing, not the polite chuckling you do when your spouse makes a joke that's only moderately funny but you laugh anyway, because you love them. I'm talking about the kind of deep, unguarded laughter that happens when something genuinely strikes you as hilarious, and you don't have to worry about whether your reaction is appropriate or too loud or might interrupt someone else's mood. Zayn had been instrumental in the rediscovery of my sense of humor, mostly by being his usual irreverent self and treating my post-divorce emotional journey like an extended comedy routine. He'd started referring to my old apartment as the crime scene and my new place as the recovery center, which should have been depressing but somehow managed to be hilarious instead. "You're becoming human again," he told me the previous weekend while we were assembling a bookshelf I'd bought for my new place. "It's weird but encouraging." "What do you mean, becoming human again?" I'd asked, trying to figure out why Swedish furniture companies seem to think assembly instructions should be written in hieroglyphics. "You know, like you're not performing anymore," he'd said, holding a handful of screws that probably belonged somewhere important. "You're just Marcus, not husband Marcus or trying to be what someone else wants Marcus. Just regular old Marcus." And he was right, though I hadn't really thought about it that way. For 5 years, I'd been unconsciously editing myself, smoothing off the rough edges and quirks that might not fit perfectly with Lauren's vision of our life together. Not because she'd asked me to, but because that's what you do when you love someone. You adapt, you compromise, you become a slightly different version of yourself that works better in the context of us. Except it turns out, the version of me that worked best in our relationship wasn't actually me at all. It was some carefully curated performance of a husband who was reliable and steady and safe, but who'd somehow lost most of the things that made him interesting in the first place. The pain still came in waves, like Zayn had warned me it would. Not the sharp, immediate agony of that first night, but something more manageable. The dull ache you get when you remember something you used to love, but can't have anymore. It was the emotional equivalent of phantom limb syndrome. Feeling the absence of something that had been part of you for so long you'd forgotten what it felt like to exist without it. But the clarity came in waves too, and those were the moments that made everything else worth it. The sudden realization that I'd been trying so hard to be enough for someone else that I'd forgotten how to be enough for myself. The understanding that love shouldn't require you to dim your own light or apologize for taking up space or wonder if you're just a placeholder until something better comes along. Lauren had been looking for excitement, for passion, for the kind of relationship that felt like a romantic comedy instead of a documentary about two people sharing living expenses and arguing about whose turn it was to buy groceries. And there was nothing wrong with wanting that, really. The problem was that she'd married someone who offered something completely different: stability, loyalty, partnership. And then spent years quietly resenting him for not being something else. I wasn't too plain. I wasn't too safe. I wasn't too anything. I was loyal, devoted, and present. I was the kind of person who remembered birthdays and anniversary dates, who brought soup when you were sick, who listened to your stories about work drama even when they weren't particularly interesting. I was someone who believed in the unglamorous, day-to-day work of loving another person consistently over time. Those weren't character flaws. They were the foundation of the kind of relationship I wanted. One built on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than drama and uncertainty and the exhausting roller coaster of passion that burns bright and fast before inevitably flaming out. And now, finally, I was free to find someone who wanted the same thing. Someone who wouldn't see my reliability as boring or my consistency as a consolation prize. Someone who understood that real love isn't about constant excitement. It's about choosing each other every day, even when it's mundane, even when it's work, even when there are no fireworks. I wasn't looking back anymore. There was nothing behind me except the ruins of a relationship that had been built on mismatched expectations and a mutual misunderstanding of what we each needed from love. I was looking ahead now, toward whatever came next, and for the first time in months, that felt like a pretty good place to be.